So the next stage is to set up the eyes, make sure that they're looking at a target object. And what we want to do actually is we want to change up our control a bit. This will be sort of the master control for the eyes, but we also want to have individual control for the eyes, for being able to target each eye separately. This will allow us to be able to do things like focus the eyes a little better without having to move the target closer in and out. We can be able to leave the target alone and be able to move each one individually. For that, we're just going to create a right and a left target for each one. And probably the best way to go about doing that is just do a couple of text objects. We'll call one right, and maybe make that a little bit bigger. And we'll call this one left. What I'm going to do with both of these is just center the pivot point. Make it a little easier to deal with. And then I want to line them both up to the, using the align tool, I want to line them both up to the main control here. And then move them out. Oops. And what I want to do is just get them kind of close to where they should be. Lined up to the eyeballs. So best way to do that is use your line tool again, but this time only align in two of the axes as opposed to all of them. And we should be able to line these up so that we've got them in the right spots, but still aligned up to the initial control object. Now what we want to do is parent both of these to it using the link tool so that we've got one control with a left and right target. We might want to actually scale this control down a little bit. And of course, scale's not something we want to use, so do it at the sub-object level, and you're far better off. And make sure we're in view. There we go. And there we go. Now we've got a left and right target. I always color code everything, of course, and I usually do that with one of my custom scripts that just makes it easy on me using color left right, and it colors things with blue in the center and red on the right, and red on the left and green on the right for port and starboard. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to set up the eyeballs. I'm just going to hide off the character for a minute, just so I can see things a bit better. And the best thing to do is not put look at constraints on the eyeballs and have them look directly at the control object. That's for a couple of reasons. One, all of a sudden they're going to pop to a new angle and you're going to have to try and get them back to the angle you want. The other thing is I always try and keep my character rig separate from the actual geometry. Reason for that is if at any point in time I wanted to go back and change the eye, swap it out for a new model, or even maybe the modeling process is still underway and the models are being worked on and I've just got a proxy eye sitting in here and I'm going to go replace it with another one later. I don't want to have that eye directly controlled. I just want it linked into an object that's controlled. That way I can just drop the new eye, parent it into place, and away I go. I've got it's all set up the way it should be. So what I'm going to start with is a couple of point helpers, and I'm going to start with some point helpers. I'm going to put the axis tripod on as well, and I'm going to line that up to the eye in rotation and position for now. Rotation I guess really isn't important, but it's a good way to go about doing it. And I'm just going to make another one of those. And what we're going to do is we're going to set those on look at constraints to the actual targeting system. Now the other thing I need to get now is the rig back, and I need to take both of the point helpers that we've created for the eyes, and we need to parent them back into the head bone. This way they actually those point helpers will move with the rest of the rig. And then before you parent the eyeballs in, this is when you want to go about setting up the constraint system for them, so that we know that they actually work and their angle's been set, so they're following it. They should end up looking directly at these because we align them to them, but just in case they're not, or however we happen to have done it. So what we want to do then is go into constraints, look at constraint, have this look at the right eye. Now if you notice right away it flipped over, it's not looking on the same axis. Again, I'd sort of rather keep things lined up to maybe the geo, so I can drop the next eye in there if it was made the same way and align it properly. I wouldn't have to guess again. So if we actually wanted to flip it around and have it looking on the Z, then we just simply need to make it look on the Z. And we might want to actually reset this, the up node, to be, there we go. So they're playing around with it. Aligned to up node axis Z, and looks like the source axis needs to be on Y, and it's aligned it up. Now what's going to happen when we move the eye target, you can see that that remains looking at it. I'm just going to unhide the control objects. Here's one thing that will probably happen, is when I start to rotate it side to side, the head side to side, you can see that that point helper that I generated, that I want to parent the eyeball to, is actually staying pointing up in world space. Well, that's no good. We want the eye to actually rotate with the head correctly from side to side. So now what we want to do is we want to set the up node to actually be the joint in the head itself. It'll probably flip this over, and we may have to go find the correct axis again if we want it to be lined up, in this case back to X, because X is along the bone. And now when I rotate the head from side to side, you can see that look at constrained point helper is angling with the head correctly, but keeps trying to point along the Z-axis towards the target. Let's do the same on the other side. Constraints, look at, and I believe it was on the Y and the X. Set the up node, and it looks like I flipped it over at some point. Make sure I've got all the settings the same. Oh, of course it has to be looking on along the Z. And there we go. And now that one's set up the same. I'm not big on these lines going on forever for the constraints, so I tend to either turn off view length absolute, and what that will do is it'll make the length of this blue line that points towards the target, it'll stop it at the actual target object. So now it actually stops at that point. I usually end up just turning this off completely and not have them come out of, if I've had half a dozen one, six of the other with animators, you could probably set this to some sort of checkbox on off or something, so that animators could turn it off on and off if they want to see where the eye direction's going. But now what you've got is a nice targeting system going, and the eyes are targeting. Now we need to go in and parent up the eyeballs to their respective point helpers. And once again, we should have a targeting system that works fairly well. Now what you can see is there's actually a little bit of roll happening on the eyes. I think this is partly due to the fact that the head bone is on an angle. And you can see that as the eyes go from side to side, it's actually rolling them a bit because the up vector is on an angle. To get around this, what we might want to do is actually parent up or drop in another point helper that this one's parented to. If we do that, then we can use that as an up vector and up vector it instead of this head bone that's on an angle. So let's go and grab another point helper, and this time I'm just going to leave it as a box. parent the targeted point helper, then parent this one to that. And now I can go in and say, actually, instead of using that bone, use this object here, and you can see that the eye suddenly flipped around. So that's kind of a bad thing. Let's actually go back. Let's unparent our eye, and this is where it's good, because if you need to adjust anything, you can just say, well, let's just unlink the eye. I don't want to move the eye. I don't want it to suddenly change where it's located in the head. And for some reason, I don't see the pivot in the right spot. Looks like the pivot of this whole object is for some reason not in the center of everything. I'm just going to go make sure that that is the case. I may have bumped something by mistake. Everything looks like it's in the right spot again now. I don't know why, but I must have bumped something. So we'll just go in and make sure those are correct. And again, you can see that the eyes are suddenly being bumped. So let's just unlink that and go ahead and readjust it. So you can see right now I've just made a simple error, but it's easy to fix without it affecting our mesh at all, because I haven't gone and actually tried to set it up on the actual eyeballs themselves. Now what I can do is I can say the up node for this should actually be that point helper, and I just need to reset up which axes are the source, and it looks like that's the correct one now, Y instead. And same thing, let's go and set this one up. Pick the new up node, change the axis, and we should be able to reparent the eyeballs back in now. And you can see now when I move it from side to side, I'm not getting any twist sort of along the z-axis that we're looking on. It is just rotating around the y. That's because its up node now is actually aligned to it. So it's always a good idea to have, anytime you're dealing with a rotation, it's good to have the object that's being controlled via the rotation parented to another node that is aligned to it, so that if essentially you're starting at 0, 0, 0. Rotations can cause enough problems, as you may have found out by now, but if you take a little bit of time to deal with them, you can actually get them to work quite well. Oops, I want the geo. Let's just do unhide by name, and now we should actually have an eye setup that targets and focuses on the control object. We can move the control object, and it focuses the eyes if we move it in and out. Not a whole lot. It's actually not going to make any change because these are lined up, but now we can actually go in and adjust the focus however we want individually on each eye. Often I've found that you need to cheat sometimes. You get the head at the right angle, the character will look cross-eyed, or the one eye will start getting buried in the side of the head and it starts looking really strange. You almost need to cheat out the other eye. And so having the individual controls is really important to be able to do that. So there is essentially a really straightforward, simple eye setup that works really well in production.